So, welcome everyone and welcome Rafi Bhonkar. I have today Rafi. So, thank you so much for joining us. And tell us who you are, where you live, just a short background, and what you do currently.
Sure. Good morning. So I am an Indian born Bene Israel Jew. First of all, just to mention, there are four different communities of Jews in India. The Bene Israel, the Kochinis from Kerala, the Bnei Menashe who are in the northeastern part in Mizoram, and the Baghdadi Jews who actually came about 150 years ago to India. So I was born to a Bene Israel family in India. And at the age of 13 is when my family migrated to Israel. So I've been here since 1970 for 55 years now. So I'm really an Israeli in that sense. Um, I grew up in Israel, uh, studied computer science at the Technion, and actually had about 40 years or so in the high-tech industry,
Mhm.
uh, in the software high-tech industry as an executive at software companies. And in the last 4 years, um, following my passion for history and archaeology, I
Mhm.
realized that the story of the Indian Jews is overlooked. And most people do not even know. Uh, Abroad, no one knows, doesn't make the connection between Jews and India. And even in Israel, the information is very brief or short, if they even know that there were multiple communities and the rich heritage. So my wife and I decided a few years ago, this is back in 22,
Mhm.
to have a project with the University of Haifa to encourage research and education in Indian Jews. And then in the last year, I got more involved with the Indian Jewish Heritage Center, which I guess we'll talk about more a little later. So I'm dedicated to doing as much as I can to promote the Indian Jewish story.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are all like, that's why we connected, right? At the book launch event of my book with Anne Sampson, Tasting Faith. So, I mean, we can talk about how we can further this conversation on the Jews of India in a bit, but um, there are quite a few Jews of Indian origin living in Israel right now, right? Do you know roughly how many?
I think the a rough estimate, there's no actual census on this subject, but I think roughly we're talking about 100,000 Jews that have Indian origin
Wow.
living in Israel right now. In different locations. They're not clustered in a specific location, but there are certain clusters in the areas of like Ashdod or Beersheba and Dimona or Lud and Ramleh, maybe in the northern suburbs of Haifa, but really they're spread all over
Okay.
and about 100,000, I would say.
And is that the Bene Israel or the Kochini Jews the highest in number, do you think?
The largest community of Jews in India, and again, in 1948, there were about 20 or 25,000 in India. So this is not a
Right.
large group in any case. It was a small minority,
Yeah.
definitely compared to the size of a population like in India. But I would say that the majority of the Jews in India were Bene Israel. So
Mhm.
probably about 15 to 20,000 were Bene Israel, and then about 5,000 Kochini Jews and about the same Baghdadi Jews. So the majority really are Bene Israel.
Bene Israel. Okay. Now, share with us a little bit about your upbringing in India and what you also, as a Jewish person, understood Zionism to be when you were growing up in India, and what was your connection to Israel before you actually made Aliyah, before you came to Israel?
Right. So I think, and now I'm talking about the Bene Israel community, but I think in general, the population of Jews in India lived in harmony
Hmm.
and with fully integrated into the Indian society in India. And this is for centuries, if not millennia. Um, and the connection, I think. one of the important things to mention is that when we lived there, there was no prosecution, there was no anti-Semitism. So in the feeling was that, we were really proud of our religion
Mm-hmm.
in India. We were accepted. It was very, it was in my school, I was in a Christian school, and we had all kinds of people of different faith in the school. There was no mention of the fact that, you're Jewish or you're Christian or you're whatever. We were all Indians and we were all living together
Mm-hmm.
and all proud of it. And so really the Israel, I think in general, was kind of always at the back of our mind, especially since 1948.
Mm-hmm.
So we were at the Independence Days, we used to have celebrations. In Israeli Independence Days, we used to have celebrations in the Jewish school. Um, and I think the connection grew over time since there was no prosecution or any kind of anti-Semitism, there was no real motivation to move quickly like it happened in
Mm-hmm.
many countries in Europe or even in many of the Muslim countries. But over time, because of the connection and the to Zionism and the draw to connect to our original homeland,
Mm-hmm.
uh, people kind of started to migrate over the centuries, and even today, I would say the Ben Israel community still is the largest in India. There's about 4,000 Jews still in India, and again, they're well integrated, living their life, and no push per se to really migrate.
Right. So, and you grew up in Mumbai, or where did you
I
grow up?
did. I was born in Mumbai and I grew up in Mumbai,
Okay.
with a family in Pune and
Right.
so on. But really, Mumbai was my hometown.
Mm-hmm. So that's where the largest number of like Bene Israel Jews are concentrated in Mumbai, Pune, in the west coast of India, right? So I
That's
think
correct.
this is a very important point that I think most Jews of Indian origin that I've spoken to say that even though there was no persecution or anti-Semitism growing up in India, the connection to Israel was really because of the roots of your faith, right? So, and this is a point I think more and more people around the globe need to understand that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. So it's not like a colonial outpost and Jews should go back to Europe. I mean, look at you. I mean, you don't look European, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely true. Israel is our new homeland,
Hmm.
and we view India as our ancestral home
Right.
because really, I mean, Jews have been living in India, especially the Bene Israel, Kochini Jews, and so on, have been living there for generations and generations. So really, it's our ancestral home. And yes, also to point out, the Bene Israel actually are in Mumbai today, but the original location was in the Konkan area with the villages on the southeastern part of Bombay.
Hmm.
And then in the last century and a half, because of job opportunities and so on, there was a migration to Mumbai.
Right. Okay. And what were your, like in your family, what was the main profession? Was there in particular professions that the Bene Israel were known for, or?
Originally, when they were living in villages, and I'm talking about 150 plus years ago, they were dealing more with oil pressing and so on. This is the Bene Israel community. But really, when they moved to Bombay with modernity, basically all of them were very much into education. So my family, my grandfather and father are lawyers. I have engineers. My grandfather was an engineer.
Mm,
My cousins are engineers, civil engineers, mechanical engineers, and so on. So a lot of the Indians worked in the railways
mm,
or in the Indian Army
mhm.
at high posts. There was a mayor of Bombay in the 1930s who was Ben Israel.
Oh, okay.
Some doctors, many were doctors. So really, education was something that was a high emphasis on the Ben Israel community.
Right. Very interesting. So, actually, it's an interesting point that the Jews of India, especially the Ben Israel or even the Baghdadi community, they contributed so much to the society overall, right? I mean, I don't even know actually how many Indians are even aware of that. So, well, from my side, thank you. Um, now you've been living in Israel now, what did you say, 55 years or
That's correct.
okay. Now, what do you think are the connection points between Indian and Israeli culture from your point of view?
So that's interesting. If you think about, Israel is a melting pot, right? So people have come here from many, many different countries. Um, the majority of Jews back probably before World War One were living in Eastern Europe.
Hmm.
Probably about 75 to 90%, not sure exactly what the number is, of Jews globally were living in Eastern Europe. Their migration to Israel was mostly traumatic because they moved from an area where there was prosecution, where there wasn't freedom of speech always, and so on. Whereas if you think about the connection point to India, India's a democracy, the largest democracy in the world, actually, and definitely in Asia.
Yeah.
And Israel is a democracy and an island of democracy in the Middle East. So
Mm,
I think that is one connection point. You know, we moved from one country that was democratic, open views, you could speak up. You could have your views publicly, talk about them publicly. And that's the same here in Israel.
mm,
The other connections are also, I think, ancient trade routes and ancient wisdom. You
mm,
think about India and the Sanskrit and everything that happened in the very old ancient times, and same with Israel,
mm,
right? So Jews have been in Israel, and the wisdom and so on with the Bible and everything around it is very ancient. So
yeah.
there's the connection also in the ancient traditions and ancient wisdom with
Mm,
both countries. And then also in terms of technology, as we know, technology is very
yeah.
advanced both in Israel and definitely also in India. A lot of the IT professions globally are held by Indians, and they're progressing so much. So
Mm.
that's a third point that is connects the two nations.
Right. So democracy, education, so all these good stuff, right? That bind India and Israel together. What about things like food and like culture, like of family and all? Do you see similarities, differences?
So there definitely are differences.
Hmm.
It's not all exactly the same. I think it would be reflected also in how the migration when Indian Jews moved to Israel. What were some of the challenges that they had or
Yeah.
things that they would have experienced. So Indians tend to be much more modest, polite.
Hmm.
Uh, Respect for elders is very normal.
Mm.
Israelis are much rougher around the surface. I would say they're much more assertive. They're direct. Okay,
Mm.
they would basically be able to have a very informal relationship. That's something that Indian Jews have gotten used to over the years. But
Yeah.
initially, if you think about the different cultures, they are different in that sense.
Mm.
With regards to family, I think both cultures really respect them, in a different manner, but definitely family has been important, very important for Indian Jews
Mm.
and also for the Israelis in Israel.
Yeah, but I think this point about being direct, I've noticed that also among many Israelis. But perhaps it's also the European influence. I don't know, because the Asian way is different. It's more like try to be polite and indirect, beat around the bush, and somehow, yeah.
Although I would say Europeans are you know in terms of manners, they're much more. Um, Israelis tend to be the extreme in terms of at least I would say the Israelis who really grew up here in Israel. Not all, and over
Okay.
the years they've kind of calmed down a bit. It's not no more that Sabar from the 1950s and 60s and
Yeah.
whatever where they were really rough. I think today they're much more calmer in that sense and easier to get along with.
Mm. I guess a lot of Jews have made Aliyah from the US, and again, the US, there is more the politeness culture. I don't know, at least there's in terms of manners and all. But it's always interesting to see how the society changes with whichever people group is coming in
Right.
um, large numbers. Now, share with us, please, about how you express Judaism living in India and living in Israel, which is a Jewish state. And India was India is a democracy, but secular state where all religions have equal rights too. But Jews were clearly a minority. So, yeah, share with us how you express Judaism in India as compared to in Israel.
So, expressing your Jewish faith in India was all community based,
Hmm.
right? So everything, when you needed to express your Jewishness, it was either at the festivals and holidays, Jewish holidays, where people would get together in either synagogues or at the Jewish schools and have their celebrations around the events that were religious or national, Israeli national. Um, it was led by the community, and the community, which was a minority, but an accepted and proud minority, lived in India. But the community really dictated or provided that envelope or the feeling of Jewishness. That's where you expressed it. Or at weddings, by the way, or ceremonies, right? So you have bar mitzvah or a wedding, and that was also an opportunity to get together and celebrate your religion and your faith with prayers and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Israel is different. I mean, Israel is a Jewish state, right? I mean, the majority of the population in Israel is Jewish. So it has a dominant and it has a national identity of Judaism, which is totally different, right,
Mm-hmm.
from the environment in India. So it's almost like you don't have to express anything because everything is Jewish, right? It's the
Yeah.
Sabbath that everything is shut down.
Mm,
It's the Jewish holidays where schools are closed, and you don't need in India when I was in school, when it was Yom Kippur or one of the or high holidays, my father used to write a letter to the teacher the next day saying he was absent because it
yeah.
was whatever. Obviously, here everything is Jewish, so high holiday everything is around the Jewish holidays and the Jewish celebrations. So in that sense, it is different,
Mm,
but it also provides, it also is challenging, right? Because on one hand, you are a proud minority in India,
mm,
and in Israel, as you may know, there's so many streams of Judaism, right?
yeah.
So everyone which kind of provides or causes some tension between the
Mm,
different groups. And
mm.
so
Yeah, that's an important point too. But in a place like India, I suppose, like as you say, proud minority, that's a good way to put it. Like it's also in a way special because no one else is. I mean, like in India, you think of Diwali, okay, the entire India is lit up and everybody knows about Diwali. But then the Jewish festivals, you get to have your own special holidays as long as your neighbors respect, which I assume they did, right? So in some ways it's so special. So it's good that you didn't face any hatred and anti-Semitism because of your faith. So you were
it
able
was
to freely
actually
express.
It was actually celebrated, and you're absolutely right. The neighbors, I mean, we lived together with communities that were Muslim,
Mm,
Christian, or Hindu, and it was very natural.
mm,
And I remember during like the New Year, we have a special a dish that is prepared by the Ben Israel. It's called halva,
mm,
and it's a special dish. It's a sweet dish,
mm,
and I remember my mom used to prepare that not just for the family and the immediate family and but also for neighbors. And so
mm.
my sister and I used to carry the dishes over to the neighbors who were Muslim or Christian or Hindu or whatever. And the other way around. When they had a festival, we used to get things from them
Yeah.
that were unique to their cuisine.
Mm.
So it was very, very common and very integrated with them.
Even that's the India I grew up in. It's just this, it's a perfect, it used to be a perfect place of coexistence and everybody respecting one another, yet
Right.
having their own faith and being distinct with your faith. So, a lot of good memories. Um, Now, what do you think are the main challenges of living in Israel for Jews of India who let's say recently did made Aliyah to Israel or who are thinking of coming and living in Israel? What are the things to keep in mind?
Well, immigration is always a challenge,
Yeah,
regardless of which community, right? You make a change, you move to a different environment.
yeah.
Some of the unique things that I think were experienced by I'm talking about the Bene Israel now, but also probably the Kuchinis to a degree, um, were the fact that initially, I mean, it was a new country, depending on which uh, year you migrated, right?
Mm,
Initially, Israel went through a huge migration back in the early 50s, right? It
mm,
doubled its population in
mm,
like 4 years. Nothing close to that around the world. So it's very
right.
unique to have a population that went from 600,000 to 1.2 million in 4 years.
Mm,
That was pretty difficult. It was difficult for everyone,
yeah.
okay? But it was especially difficult also for the Indian Jews because they were not prosecuted. So they came here, it was their choice.
Mm,
They came here and they experienced, in many cases, discrimination
mm,
in terms of the housing or the settlements that they were sent to were
mm,
typically in the periphery. Um, Jobs which were more difficult because the language was different, right? It was
yeah.
Hebrew. And so, you know, you were trained or educated to a certain profession and it was very
Mm,
difficult to find a job that reflected your education. So it was difficult. I think over the years it has become slightly easier, okay, but still, it's a challenge. It's a challenge in terms of the language, in terms of the job market, in terms of the we talked about the cultural differences in terms of how people behave.
mm,
And then, also just getting used to a society that we talked about a proud minority and then a dumb.
mm.
The tension here between the groups is something that, is new to people who come from India.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, as you say, like migration anywhere is hard. So yeah, but you're migrating by choice, and then there are a lot of advantages also of living in Israel or living within your community, and yeah, not being an outsider all the time. In many ways, you are an outsider, I guess. Like, okay, I mean, I've been living in Germany for many, many years. I'm a German citizen, but I'm still looked at as an outsider
Right.
in so many ways. So, yeah. Um, but how, like, per year, what would you say, like, how many people move to Israel from India, from the Jewish
You
community?
mean over the years?
Yeah, or in recent years, let's say, because there are
Uh,
not too many Jews left in India, but
Exactly. I mean, again, looking at the Bene Israel community as one example, and it's different in other communities. So the Bene Israel community has moved in waves or in trickles, right? So it started with the 1950s, but really grew over time. Many of them really moved in the late 60s and 70s. That was probably the majority of the move. And then still there are many left, and it's trickles at this point. So, very small migrations of Jews. The Kochini community was different. In the early 50s, they moved as a group. In a few years,
right.
all of them had migrated to Israel.
Mm,
The Baghdadis were a different story too. I mean, they exactly same thing around 1947, 48, when Israel was founded, and actually the main trigger for them was the independence of India. They
mm,
moved to English-speaking Western countries, to US, England, Australia, and
mm,
Israel. So they were moved as a group mostly. There are still Baghdadis, but very few. There's 25 Kochini Jews.
Mm.
And then the Bene Menashe story is different.
Yeah.
Just last 10 years, probably, or 20, 30 years, 5,000 have come here, and another 5,000 are still looking for making Aliyah.
Right. And the Bene Menashe group, I feel like in the last years, maybe because of the internet now or whatever, but Benny Menashe are really in the spotlight now because also in Europe, it seems most people, when they think of Jews from India, they automatically think of the Menashe. That's my experience when I speak to the
Interesting.
Jews. And then I said, no, actually, there've been a lot more Jews in India, the other Jewish communities, but they are mostly away from India, but there's still a lot of heritage. Like if you go to Mumbai, you see still like the Bene Israel and Baghdadi heritage are also in Kolkata. Um, but talking about the Jewish communities of India, so now we come to your main work in Israel that you're doing now, and the Indian Jewish Heritage Center. So, yeah, tell us about it.
So, if you think about it, there are Jewish heritage centers in India for Libyan Jews from Libya,
Mm-hmm,
from Cochin, of course, and I'll talk about that in extent, from Babylon, Iraq,
mm-hmm,
Yemen, Turkey, Ethiopia, North Africa, Tunis, but there is no one Indian Jewish Heritage Center today.
mm-hmm,
There is, I mentioned the Cochini Jewish Heritage
mm-hmm.
Center, which has been around for the last 30 years,
Yeah.
but really nothing that encompasses all of the Jewish communities as one.
Mm-hmm,
There are many groups of Indian Jews that have gotten together, organizations. There are two B'nai Menashe groups. Um, there, the interesting thing is that for whatever reason, this hasn't happened. There hasn't been a single location, a single museum complex of activity around the Indian Jews.
mm-hmm,
And that's what triggered a group of people. Actually, this is 15 years ago, that they decided, okay, let's kind of put together and start an organization that encompasses all of the Indian Jews, all the four communities in one.
mm-hmm,
Um, that group has been working for the last 15 years. And in the last year, with the help of Ariela, who I think
mm-hmm.
you know
Yeah.
well, Ariela Daniels,
Mm-hmm,
we've kind of started to kind of reposition the group and really create something new, something that will be exciting, not just for those that came from Israel, from India
mm-hmm.
over the years in the past, but also for the next generation,
Right.
which is really the generation that needs to carry the torch
Mm-hmm.
further to the next generations so people know where their parents or grandparents came from and can experience that. And
Right.
just in the past year, I think some of the active members in this group has grown by, I mean, initially there was none of the youngsters, 30 plus, I would still say, born in Israel or born outside India. And we now have about 40 members that are 40% of our members who are born outside of India, and Ariela is one of them. And that's
Yeah.
important because we want to get those people
Yeah.
engaged. And many of them have excellent skills that can help really preserve our heritage, preserve and celebrate our heritage.
Mm.
So
Because
that's
it's important to mention people like Ariella because her parents, or in some cases grandparents, they moved from India to the diaspora anywhere else in the world, like Canada or Australia. But then the next generation comes back to Israel, and yet they preserve their heritage, and that is so important. So you're kind of like showcasing all these people, right? So
exactly.
you have a building then, or you have a campus, or what? Where is the center?
So we have something that exists and we have a vision. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What exists, like I mentioned, is a Cochini Jewish Heritage
Yeah.
Center in a town or in a moshav
Mm-hmm.
called Nevatim, which
Mm-hmm.
is a moshav where the Cochini Jews back in the 50s moved to, one of the moshavim or
Right.
settlements that the Cochini Jews moved to.
Mm-hmm.
There, for the last 30 plus years, they've had a museum, a Cochini museum, and one of the a reconstruction of a Cochini synagogue that exists there.
Okay.
So what the Indian Jewish Heritage Center organization did was connect and hook up with this group and said, let's start doing something together.
Yeah.
And the intention is to build a complex, or vision is to build a complex with
Right.
an auditorium, a new, brand new, large museum,
Mm-hmm.
and a garden with Indian trees and so on around it. That's where we have our statue right now, of the Maharaja that I mentioned before.
Yeah.
So the intention is to have a single location where people who are connected either have from the communities themselves or people who have an affinity to Indian Jews or want to learn more about Indian
Mm-hmm.
Jews have one complex where you can go to and celebrate that. So that's the intention.
So it's more like a museum with exhibitions, or do you also have the vision of maybe doing culture events like presenting music, dance of like Indian background or food or
So there are the events and so on we're already doing. I mean we've been doing this and we continue to do these kind of events on an ongoing basis. We've been doing it at different locations wherever it makes sense.
right?
But we want to start consolidating that into one location as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had Bene Menashe exhibitions at all the different campuses of the Hebrew University. We had opening ceremonies for them and so on. We've had a cuisine or a food event with foodish at Anu Museum. Anu
Mm-hmm.
Museum is the
Yeah, Tel Aviv.
museum for a Jewish museum. It's a very large museum in Tel Aviv, in
Mm-hmm.
the Tel Aviv University campus. There we had a celebration of all the different recipes of food that came from all the four communities with personal stories about how
Right.
this took place.
Amazing.
We've had birthright groups. I think you missed the last one that
Yeah.
came to Israel, and we had them at
Mm-hmm.
our place. We've had groups of at the Writers' House in it's called Beta Sofer in Tel Aviv, an
Mm-hmm.
event where we celebrated authors and poets of Indian origin
Mm-hmm.
that gave talks and so on about that. So we've been having these kind of ceremonies and so on ongoing, and we will continue. And in parallel, our vision is to create a hub
Mm-hmm.
for to really celebrate and the heritage and preserve the heritage of Indian Jews and of all the four different communities, which is what makes us unique because
Yeah.
we want to encompass them all and have them all celebrated in a single location.
It's kind of like almost like a mini version of India because India is so diverse as well, right? It's India, but then within India, what people don't understand, it's so diverse with different communities and cultures, almost subcultures. So it's the same with the Jews of India. You have like you're all Jews from India, but you have your own communities with different stories, historical background, and also it's actually fascinating. So let's talk a bit about how can we take this conversation further. How can we change the conversation even on Indian Jews? Because there's so much history here, so much culture, yet so few people know about it. Maybe in Israel, maybe more and more people are getting to know. Um, but in the diaspora, yeah, not many.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of our goals, I mean, our goals, in addition to preserving the history and the information and the culture and the heritage, of course, of Indian Jews, is also to enable the community itself or
Hmm.
people who are affiliated with the community to express themselves, like
Hmm.
the foodish event, right? They could come and tell their story with a
Hmm.
recipe
Yeah,
and share their experience. But probably the main thing, and this is where potentially you can help, is to represent the narrative of
right.
the Indian Jews at institutions around the world. And we're trying to do this. So I
Mm,
have connections, as I mentioned, to the Haifa University, and we're doing activities there, or academic conferences, education, trying to get into the curriculum of the Indian Jew, get into the curriculum
yeah.
some idea to get people educated on Indian Jews also with PhD students who are doing research. And
Hmm.
these are PhD students who are not external, right? So you probably know some of the research that was done by experts, but they are not from the community itself. What we want to
Right.
do is to get the individuals from within the community to do research on the Indian Jews. So that's another aspect. And then the Hebrew University, where we're doing exhibitions, and the ANU.
Mm.
So really to get the word across and the story about Indian Jews is to tell the story to the world through the institutions that people know, not just in Israel, around the world.
Yeah, that's what I mean because I think Um, if I think of most people I've met in Israel, they know about the Jews of India. I mean, I think in the last few years there have been more activities through you all. But yeah, people in Europe hardly know about the Jews of India. Some may have heard, yeah, but and if you talk about yeah, Jews of India, they're like, what? Jews of India? What's that? So yeah, I think going to the academic world is a good step forward. And of course, culture events. And maybe in the future, also your building and the museum of the Jewish people from India through this Indian Jewish Heritage Center could even be a tourist attraction.
Actually, it already is to an extent,
Okay.
although it doesn't physically the overall four communities are not yet do not have a museum, but the place itself has a small museum of the community, the Kuchini Jews,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where tourist groups do come there. So
Okay.
they do visit. One of the projects, by the way, that we're building is a VR project. So you
Mm,
can actually sit in a room and you can experience being at a synagogue in India, whether it's a Bene Israel or a Kochini or a Bene or a Baghdadi synagogue, and experience being at one of the high holidays at the synagogue with the tunes and so on in the background. So we've started a project to do that, and that will also be projected and shown there, initially in the smaller museum, but then we'll move it to our museum, the large museum when we have it. So you start to get that kind of environment, and definitely, especially because the South, Nevatim is in the south of Israel,
mm,
is an area where it is growing.
mhm,
Okay, I mean, all the army bases are moving down south. That's where the land is available and so on. So
mm.
there's a lot of movement down south. And as the tourist groups go down there and visit different places, we want to be the center of that
Right.
tourism point.
Yeah,
And that activity has started, but we need to expand it. You're absolutely right.
right. So, just wrapping up this conversation, what would be your if you were able to give one message to the West, both Jews and non-Jews, and one message to people from India, just people from India, not Jewish people, the non-Jews of India, what would they be?
I
From
think it would be
Rafi Bhonkar.
okay. It would be a common message.
Hmm.
I think the common message would be that there is an unfamiliar and overlooked um, story
Hmm.
about Jews, not from the West, but
Hmm.
from India, that is interesting, is important to know. So come learn, come study, come understand what the story is, because I think in more than just a story, it is something about getting the concept of toleration, coexistence, something that is so important to the world in general today.
Yeah.
And that's something that a story that the Indian Jews can tell. I mean, I mentioned my personal story, and that's true. Just like you said, you yourself experienced it, and that's something that we can tell the world. And I think that's important.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope we can do it together and carry this message forward. Well, thank you so much, Rafi, for joining me.
Thanks for having me here.